Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at how nationalism is affecting global politics. It's a really complex topic, right? We've got some really great sources to help us unpack it. We're going to be looking at Yuval Noah Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century and Homo Deus, and we're even going to take a peek at his fictional work, Nexus.
It's going to be interesting to see how those all connect.
Exactly. And Harari really doesn't shy away from asking those tough questions, so...
No, he doesn't. He really pushes us to think differently. I mean, one of the biggest things that he does is he questions whether, this nation-state model that we're all so used to, if it's actually still the best way to deal with all these global challenges that we're facing in the 21st century.
Yeah, that is a big question, isn't it? So can you give us an example of what you mean, like where this nation-state model maybe isn't working so well?
Well, look at climate change, right? It's a global issue. It doesn't care about borders. Whatever one country does is going to affect everybody else, but we're still seeing countries struggle to work together. And, a lot of times they're putting their own short-term interests ahead of the planet's future.
Yeah, it's like everyone's kind of stuck in their own little bubble.
Right. And Harari points out that it's not just climate change. The nation-state model really struggles with a lot of these big global issues like AI, like bioengineering.
Yeah, that's right. He talks about genetically engineering embryos as an example, doesn't he?
Yes. Imagine one country decides, you know what, this is too risky, we're not going to do it. But another country says, hey, this is a huge opportunity, we're going all in.
Right.
Suddenly you've got this massive imbalance, maybe even a military advantage, and that first country might be forced to reconsider their original decision. All of a sudden, those borders don't seem so important anymore.
They're almost meaningless in a way. So if the nation-state model is struggling like this, I mean, what's the alternative? Does Harari offer any solutions? Is he suggesting some kind of world government or something?
Well, he doesn't specifically say we need a world government, but he does argue that we need to find new ways to cooperate globally. We need a new sense of shared identity, of what it means to be human in this interconnected world, because sticking with this us versus them mentality, it's just not going to work anymore.
It's too small a way of thinking.
Exactly.
But here's the thing, right? At the same time that we're having this conversation about global cooperation, we're also seeing this huge surge in nationalism all over the world. It's like we're being pulled in two opposite directions.
It's a paradox, and Harari really highlights this tension. On the one hand, you have people who are really clinging to nationalism. Maybe they're afraid of change, or maybe they just want to hold on to the familiar, the traditional ways of life. They see the nation state as this source of stability and identity in a world that feels really chaotic and uncertain.
Like a life raft almost.
Yeah.
But what about those who are actually drawn to nationalism? What's fueling that?
I think for some, it's a reaction against globalization and liberalism. They feel like these systems have failed them, They've been left behind economically, ignored by the elites, and they feel like their values are being eroded.
So nationalism is kind of a backlash against those things.
In a way, yes. And it gives them a sense of belonging. It promises to restore order and control.
It's a very powerful feeling.
It is.
So how do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory forces? How do we balance this emotional pull of national identity with the need for global cooperation? It's a tough one.
It really is. And Harari doesn't give us any easy answers. But I think that's kind of the point. He's really challenging us to think critically about these issues, to have those difficult conversations and figure out what kind of future we want to create together. And speaking of challenges, we can't forget about the role technology is playing in all of this. Harari really goes deep into how AI and biotechnology are disrupting our traditional values and potentially changing the political landscape in ways that we can't even fully grasp yet.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer of complexity.
It is. And one of his main arguments is that as AI gets more sophisticated, it's going to be able to analyze our behavior, predict our decisions even better than we can ourselves. And that creates all sorts of opportunities, like governments and corporations could use AI to make better decisions, right? But it also raises some serious concerns about what happens to individual freedom and democracy in that kind of world.
Right. It's like, are we really in control of our lives, or are the algorithms calling the shots?
Exactly. And Harari paints a pretty unsettling picture of a future where algorithms might be deciding what we study, where we work, even who we marry.
That's a bit scary.
It is. It makes you wonder what happens to human creativity and free will in that kind of world, you know? Do we just become passive consumers of these algorithmically curated
Like
experiences?
we're just going through the motions.
Yeah, or can we find ways to assert our own agency and shape our own destinies?
It's almost like a fight for our own humanity in a way.
In a way, it is. And Harari takes it even further. He warns about this possibility of what he calls digital dictatorships.
Digital dictatorships, what's that?
It's where governments or corporations could use technology to gain this unprecedented level of control over people's lives. I mean, they wouldn't even need tanks or soldiers to control the population.
It would be much more subtle than that.
Much more subtle. They would use AI and data to manipulate emotions, to shape opinions, and to make it almost impossible for people to resist.
Like kind of brainwashing people without them even realizing it.
In a way, yes. And he points out that the trends are already there. Like, we're seeing how social media algorithms can spread misinformation, influence elections. Now imagine those same technologies becoming even more sophisticated, integrated into every part of our lives. The potential for control it's really immense.
It's almost like a dystopian science fiction novel, but it feels like it could actually happen.
It does, doesn't it?
So we've got a lot to unpack here. We've got global challenges that the nation-state model can't seem to handle. We've got nationalism on the rise at the same time that we need global cooperation. And we've got technology that could either liberate us or enslave us. It's a lot to think about. I mean, where do we even begin to look for solutions in all of this?
Well, Harari suggests that we have to start by rethinking our very understanding of what it means to be human in the 21st century. This traditional emphasis on individual freedom, on self-expression maybe, that needs a serious update in a world of algorithms and manipulation.
So we need to redefine what it means to be human in this new world.
I think so. And he draws some really interesting insights from Buddhism here. Like, he suggests that understanding the nature of suffering, understanding the limitations of seeking happiness in external things can actually help us navigate these really turbulent times.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about finding political solutions, it's about looking inward as well.
Right.
Examining our own values and beliefs.
Exactly. And that's where Harari's work gets really interesting, I think. He's not just analyzing the problems. He's challenging us to really examine our own assumptions about the world and our place in it.
Okay, so this has been a really insightful look at some of the big ideas in 21 lessons, but we've only scratched the surface of Harari's work. In Homo Deus, he goes even deeper into these ideas about the potential consequences of technology. Like, he talks about this idea of a useless class emerging.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And the rise of data as the new currency of power. And then in his fictional work, Nexus, he really pushes the boundaries of what's possible with technology and explores what happens when humans can connect their minds directly.
It sounds wild.
It is. It's really thought-provoking.
I'm intrigued to see where this goes.
Yeah. So stay tuned, because we're going to be diving into all of that and more in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. Can't wait. So before we went to, before we moved on, we were talking about technology and how it's impacting the world. And you brought up this idea of the useless class, which Harari talks about. I mean, it's kind of a scary thought, right?
Yeah, definitely a bit unsettling. So can you explain a little bit more about what he means by that? What is this useless class?
He's talking about the idea that as artificial intelligence and automation keep getting better, there's a chance they'd actually end up replacing a huge chunk of the workforce. And this wouldn't just be about people losing their jobs. It's about them potentially losing their sense of purpose. Like, what happens when you have a whole group of people who not only can't find work, but also feel like they don't have anything to contribute to society anymore? It's especially tough in a world that seems to value tech skills above all else.
Right. So it's not just an economic problem. It becomes a social and even a psychological issue. Right?
Exactly. And this actually connects back to what we were talking about earlier with nationalism. When people are feeling economically insecure and they've lost that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging, they might be more likely to turn to something like nationalism, which promises them a clear identity and a sense of order in a world that feels very chaotic.
It's like they're grasping for something to hold on to.
Right.
So it sounds like you're saying these technological trends and these political trends, they're not separate issues. They're actually feeding into each other.
They are. They're definitely intertwined. And Harari argues that it's really important to understand those connections if we want to navigate the 21st century effectively. He also highlights the growing importance of data in this new world. He says that those who control the data will ultimately control the future.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
What exactly does he mean by that?
He's suggesting that in a world where data is the most valuable asset, more valuable than oil or gold, whoever can collect and analyze and manipulate that data, they're going to have a huge amount of power. They'll be able to shape economies, they'll be able to influence political decisions, and maybe even, engineer life itself.
So it's like data is the new currency of power.
It kind of is. And Harari explores these ideas in his fictional work, Nexus, where he imagines a world where humans can connect their minds and share their thoughts and feelings directly.
Whoa, so kind of like telepathy.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like science fiction, but he uses this fictional scenario to examine, like, what would that actually mean for society? What would it mean for our sense of self, our privacy, our relationships, our understanding of what it means to be human if all of that was suddenly out in the open?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, would it make us more empathetic and understanding if we could literally feel each other's emotions? Or would it just make our conflicts and prejudices even worse?
That's one of the things he explores in the book. He suggests that more communication doesn't always lead to more harmony, right? Like sometimes it can actually make things worse. It can exacerbate those existing tensions.
Yeah, it's a reminder that technology isn't always the answer.
Right. And Nexus is kind of a cautionary tale. He's saying we need to really think about the potential consequences of our choices, especially when it comes to technology. Because once we open that Pandora's box, it might be impossible to close it again.
So it sounds like Harari is urging us to be more mindful, to be more intentional about how we develop and use these powerful technologies.
He is. And I think that's one of the things that makes his work so valuable, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. He's not afraid to ask the hard questions, to challenge our assumptions, to force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we're creating.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, Harari also talks about the potential for good. Technology has the potential to help us solve some of our biggest problems.
Absolutely. He definitely acknowledges that. Like in 21 Lessons and Homo Deus, he talks about how technology could help us eradicate disease, extend our lifespans, maybe even create abundance and prosperity for everyone on the planet.
Okay, so there's hope.
There's always hope. But his point is that technology is ultimately a tool. It can be used for good or for bad. The outcome depends on the choices we make.
So we need to be wise in how we use it. We can't just assume it's going to automatically lead to a better future.
Right, and we need to make sure that technology serves humanity, not the other way around.
So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about religion. In a world that's so obsessed with technology and science, a lot of people might think that religion is irrelevant or outdated. But Harari actually has some interesting things to say about the role of religion in the 21st century.
He does. He actually argues that even though traditional religions might be declining in some parts of the world, the human need for meaning and purpose, that's not going away.
So even if we're not going to church or temple every week, we're still searching for something to believe in.
We are. We're still searching for something bigger than ourselves, something to give our lives meaning and direction. And Harari suggests that this search might lead to new forms of religion, maybe even what he calls secular religions.
Secular religions, huh?
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea. What does he mean by that?
He's talking about ideologies or movements that kind of fulfill the same psychological and social functions that traditional religions used to. They provide a sense of belonging, a shared set of values, a framework for understanding the world.
So, could something like nationalism be considered a secular religion? Or environmentalism? Or even transhumanism?
Exactly. They offer a sense of purpose, a vision for the future, maybe even a set of rituals and practices.
Like a code to live by.
Right.
And he seems to suggest that these secular religions could actually be even more powerful than traditional religions in the 21st century.
Yeah, he argues that because they're often more adaptable, more in tune with the changing times.
Yeah.
And they can harness technology and media in a way that a lot of traditional religions struggle to do.
But that brings us back to that whole digital dictatorship thing, doesn't it? Like, if people are searching for meaning and purpose and they're finding it in these secular religions,
it becomes much easier for charismatic leaders or powerful institutions to manipulate them, to exploit those longings and get them to support their own agenda.
Right. Because if you can control the narrative, you can control the people. And in this digital world, it's easier than ever to control the narrative.
It is. Harari warns that digital dictatorships could use AI and social media to create these echo chambers where people are only exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs. They could spread propaganda, silence dissent, and make it really difficult for people to think critically.
So we're not just talking about like censorship here. It's more insidious than that. It's about shaping people's perceptions of reality.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to develop that critical thinking, that ability to question what you're seeing and hearing, to look for evidence, to consider different perspectives. Because if we don't, we could easily end up giving up our freedom and autonomy in exchange for this sense of comfort and belonging that's ultimately an illusion.
So what can we do about it? Like, how do we avoid falling into that trap?
Well, Harari talks about the importance of things like meditation, developing emotional intelligence, cultivating that sense of curiosity and wonder about the world. And he also emphasizes education. Like, we need to be teaching young people how to think critically, how to spot misinformation, how to be responsible citizens in this digital age.
So it's not just about resisting the bad stuff. It's about building up the good stuff, right? Like developing those qualities that will help us thrive in this new world.
Exactly. And he says one of the most important tools we have for shaping a better future is actually storytelling.
Storytelling. That seems a little bit, I don't know, soft maybe in the face of all these huge global challenges we're talking about.
I know, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but he makes a really good case for it. He argues that every human society is built on shared stories. Our laws, our institutions, our values, our very identities, they're all shaped by the stories we tell ourselves and each other.
So you're saying in a world where everything is changing so fast, where the old stories are breaking down, we need new stories to guide us, to inspire us, to help us make sense of it all.
Exactly. We need new stories that embrace complexity and uncertainty, stories that empower us to be both critical thinkers and compassionate actors in the world.
I can see how storytelling fits into the bigger picture now. It's not just about entertainment. It's about shaping our understanding of the world and our place in it.
Right. And Harari reminds us that we're all storytellers. Like every time we have a conversation, every time we express an opinion, every time we connect with another human being, we're telling a story.
And those stories, even the small ones, they have the power to shape the world.
They do. It's a powerful reminder that even in a world that's increasingly dominated by technology, human agency still matters. Our choices, our actions, the stories we tell, they can make a difference.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the nation state struggling to keep up, the allure of nationalism, the challenges of technology, the dangers of these digital dictatorships, the evolving role of religion, and even the power of storytelling. Whew.
It's been a really interesting journey through Harari's ideas, and he offers us both a warning and a challenge. Like, he's warning us about the potential dangers we face, but he's also challenging us to be active and engaged citizens, people who are shaping the future, not just passively accepting whatever comes our way.
Before we wrap up, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from this conversation? What should they be thinking about as they go forward?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we're at a crossroads. Technology is giving us these incredible powers, but it's also creating these huge challenges for our political systems, our values, our very understanding of what it means to be human. And the choices we make today, they're going to have a huge impact on the future.
It's not enough to just sit back and watch it all happen.
No. We need to be active participants in this conversation. We need to be asking the tough questions, demanding accountability, and making sure that the future we're creating is one that aligns with our values.
Because if we don't, we might end up living in that dystopian world that Harari warns us about.
Yeah, and nobody wants that.
Okay, so much to think about.
Oh.
We've been talking about how technology and politics are kind of colliding in this century. And we're seeing nationalism on the rise. It's a lot to process.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all. But one of the things we have to remember is that we're not just passive observers in all of this. We can actually shape the future.
You mentioned storytelling earlier, and I'm really curious about that. How can storytelling actually help us navigate these really complex challenges?
Well, think about it this way. The stories we tell ourselves about the world, about our countries, about who we are, those stories actually shape what we believe and how we act.
Okay, so you're saying that the stories we're exposed to, they have a real impact on our lives.
Exactly. Like if we're constantly hearing stories of fear and division and scarcity, that's going to affect how we see the world and the choices that we make.
That makes sense. So then if we want to create a more positive future, we need to change the stories we're telling, right?
Exactly. We need stories that focus on things like cooperation and compassion, stories that remind us that we're all connected, that we're all in this together, stories that celebrate our shared humanity and highlight our potential for creativity and innovation.
Okay, I like that. I like that idea. But but how do we actually change the narrative? The stories about nationalism and technological disruption, they seem so dominant right now. It's like, how do we even begin to shift that?
It is a challenge, definitely, but I don't think it's impossible. We have to remember that we're all storytellers in our own way, right? Like every conversation we have, every choice we make, every action we take, it all contributes to the bigger story.
So you're saying that even small actions can make a difference.
I think so. Look at the impact of social movements, right? Grassroots activism, artists and writers who challenge the status quo with their work. Those are all forms of storytelling, and they can really shift the narrative and inspire change.
I guess it's about reclaiming our power, both as
Yeah.
individuals and as a collective.
Right. And it starts with being aware of the stories we're telling ourselves, the stories we're consuming, and the stories we're putting out into the world. We have to ask ourselves, are these stories helping us? Or are they holding us back? Are they moving us toward a future we want? Or are they keeping us stuck in these cycles of fear and division?
It's a lot to think about. It's also really empowering.
It is empowering, isn't it? It reminds us that we're not just helpless bystanders. We can actually do something.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Harari's work, I think the biggest takeaway is this. We have a choice. We can choose to let fear and division shape the future, or we can choose to create a world where cooperation, compassion, and our shared humanity are the guiding principles. What kind of story do you want to tell? And what role will you play in writing that story? That's something for all of us to think about as we go forward.
Well said. I think that's a great place to leave it. Until next time.
Keep diving deep.